Well, I'll warn you, if you've spent 15 years in the restaurant and the bar business like I did, you're never at your best on a Monday morning. And that's carried over to a certain extent. I'm just going to take a few minutes before the panel to welcome you all to Colorado and then kind of talk just for a minute about how I come at some of these challenges, especially around transportation, that not just Denver, but the country's facing. We always think of the West as a place of rugged individualism, and yet the reality is that the original trappers and fur traders came out, and they never went into the mountains by themselves. That was the very, very rare exception, and a lot of times those guys didn't come back. They went up in groups of 10 or 20, sometimes 25, and one person would be laying traps, one person would be harvesting the traps, one person would be cooking the food, one person would be skinning and preparing the pelts. It was a collaborative effort that really allowed us to come out to the West. And that's sort of where when I got laid off as a geologist back in '86, I ended up trying to open up a brew pub in lower downtown Denver, right across from the train station, and where 8 years later they built Coors Field. As my grandfather said, you got to work hard your whole life, but it's better to be lucky than to be good. But when we opened that, the rent in Lodo was $1 a square foot per year, just a frame of reference. And we had a bunch of young developers who didn't know any better, who really went out of their way to work together. And when we opened Wine Coop in 1988, we were the first restaurant to open downtown in 5 years. And yet we went up and we put ads inside our vestibule marketing McCormick's Fish House, which was 2 blocks away in the Oxford Hotel, the Wazee Supper Club. And my staff said, this is a dog-eat-dog business, the restaurant business. You can't market your competitors. And I said, well, maybe our real competitor is the TV set. And our job is to get people off the couch and out the door to enjoy life with their family and friends. We do a good enough job. Our competitors do a good enough job. We create a rising tide. More people go out more often, and they more likely go to Lodo. And so we started buying pint glasses together. We started doing ads in the newspapers around Lodo being a great place to go and listing 5 different restaurants. And fast forward when they were looking where to put Coors Field 6 years later, Lodo suddenly, instead of abandoned warehouses where the rent was almost free, was a really desirable place. Also, you learn in the restaurant business 2 things. My designer would put the bar seats too close to what the high-top tables were around the bar. And I said, well, the people are going to bump into each other. He goes, exactly. Friendly friction. And when people bump into each other, they're more likely to strike up a conversation or actually just begin an acquaintance that can go to a relationship. They can create friendships that way. And that's why so many really popular restaurants, you look at them, they are kind of close together. We tried to use that in the restaurant and in the political business. When I got elected mayor in 2003, we tried to find ways to bring people together. And the other thing I learned in the restaurant business was there's no margin in having enemies. And that lesson in the restaurant business, no matter how unreasonable the customer, you make sure they don't leave unhappy. Well, you make sure they don't leave pissed off. Because then they go out and ruin your reputation, and you're always playing catch-up. You don't know what they're saying and who they're saying it to until weeks later. That is one of the biggest problems, I think, in politics now, is most professional politicians define themselves by their enemies. And they don't try and figure out a way to work with everybody. And that's what the small business, almost any small retail business will teach you. When I got elected mayor, the mayor of Denver hated the suburbs. The suburbs hated Denver. And yet we went out, when I ran for mayor, and I went out and talked to almost every suburban mayor, the large suburban communities, and said, hey, if I get elected mayor, I'm going to do everything I can to make you successful, because we'll never have a great city without great suburbs. And I don't think you'll have great suburbs without a great city. And when I got elected, a year and a half later, we passed fast tracks at the ballot, almost 60-40. And yeah. Fast tracks was, at that time we had 34 mayors in the metropolitan area, and the Metro Mayor's Caucus had started almost 20 years before, and they had come together, and so my job was to go around and talk to each one of them, and it's a whole long story I don't have time for today, but we ended up getting all 34 mayors, of whom 2/3 were either Republicans or independents that lean conservative. All 34 mayors unanimously supported a 0.4% sales tax increase to build fast tracks. Right? Fast Tracks was 122 miles of new track, the largest transit initiative in the history of the country, and we got every single mayor to support it just by going out there and listening and making sure that we didn't have, anytime we had any animosity or friction, we immediately did everything we could to take care of it. And I think that's going to be the future of this country, is that we're going to be able to, you know, bring people together, find avenues by which we can collaborate and really focus on those compromises in the beginning that lead to the bigger compromises down the road. And you might say it's impossible, and I'll finish with this. When I first ran for mayor, I ran for mayor in 2003. I was the first, first brew pub owner, first person to open a brew pub between New York and California. So I was in kind of this strange territory. And then I ran for governor. I was the first mayor of Denver in 140 years to be elected governor of Colorado. And in each case, I had this old clipping. It was almost like a rabbit's foot about a professor at the University of Wyoming talking about the importance of using opposites when you speak publicly. And she was telling her class, if you're going to talk about the worst of times, talk about the best of times. If you're going to talk about the agony, talk about the ecstasy. Now, these words gain emotional impact by being together. And she asked her class, what's the opposite of despair? Kid raised her hand, goes, joy. She goes, exactly. If you want people to really feel despair, use joy in the same sense. The words gain emotional impact by being together. Then she said, what's the opposite of woe? And a kid way in the back goes, giddy up! And the bottom line is that the opposite of woe is to giddy up. And I think what we tried to do in Colorado, we took fast tracks. We have now over 1,000 miles of bike trails in Metro Denver. We tried to make this, not just Metro Denver, but the state of Colorado, a beacon for young people. We have now more live music venues in Denver than there are in Nashville or Austin. And a lot of that energy, of that infrastructure, like the fast tracks, the bike trails, all that, has allowed us to become this mecca for young people. And we now, for the last 5 months, our unemployment has either been, it's been between 2.4% and 2.3%. We have, by every measure, one of the top 2 or 3 economies in the country. And I think a large part of that is our mayors and our transportation infrastructure professionals. Every time it gets bad, they just giddy up. So thank you very much for being here.